It's a little terrifying because you absolutely cannot miss.
Goalies now are completely at a premium.
Not, right? Like, Canada doesn't have a ton of great options.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Hockey News Big Show. I'm your host, Katie Gaus, joined by my co-host, Michael Traikos, and our special guest co-host, Ottawa Senators site editor, Steve Warne. And guys, it is that time again, Friday, which means it's time for our Top 8 Contenders segment. So we have a new Top 8 to get into because we have Steve joining us in place of Ryan Kennedy, who we've seen his picks for the last few weeks. So I want to kick things off by getting into Steve's list to see who he has his eye on to make a cup run. So I'm going to list it off here, starting with, we've got Dallas, Edmonton, Washington, Winnipeg, Carolina, Vegas, Colorado, and Tampa. So this is interesting. We've got some interesting differences here. Don't see Florida on there, Steve. Is there a reason for that? Let's start with that one.
Yeah, it's one of those deals where I say, okay, who's likely to play that team in the first round? And that,
Sure.
I reserve the right to change this list completely if Florida beats Tampa in the first round, if it goes down that way. I just don't. This is how bullish I am on Tampa Bay. I really think that they'll take care of business against the Florida Panthers, particularly if, the Barkov and Tkachuk injuries are drag on into the playoffs. So that's the only reason Florida doesn't appear here. So I may have messed it up the way you guys normally do it, but that's kind of how I approached it. If I don't think you're getting out of the first round, you're probably not in my top 8 contenders.
There's no right or wrong way, or maybe just my way is the wrong way, but we'll see.
And just for the record, Michael, I'd like to point this out because I don't feel like I got nearly enough credit. You got all the site editors from the Hockey News together, and you had everybody pick all these different categories about what they think is going to happen during the course of the season. I was one of only 2 site editors to pick the Florida Panthers to win it all. So I'm just going to pat myself on the back right now.
Okay, well then, even a broken clock is right, twice a day there, Steve.
Blind squirrel, acorn.
It's funny because Michael does the opposite approach really to Steve. He says, okay, who are the 2 teams that are going to face each other? They're both good. One of them is definitely going to win, and he puts them both in. So he's got Colorado and Dallas both in there, even though they're facing off. He still has Florida as his top pick. But Michael, why don't you tell us about a new addition to your list? You have St. Louis sneaking in at number 8.
You can't ignore what the Blues are doing. And I think, for the longest time, I kept saying to myself, is this for real? Are the Blues really this good? And, you look at their record since January, and there's few teams that have been hotter than the St. Louis Blues. And this is a team that at one time they were talking about trading Brady Tkachuk, basically having a full-on fire sale. Basically, a month or 2 ago, they lose Colton Parayko. This is a team that should not be anywhere close to a playoff spot. And yet here we are. This is a team that can't lose right now. So,
literally,
I don't envy whether it's going to be Winnipeg, whether it's going to be Vegas. That's going to have to face a wild card team in the Blues. But right now I've got them at number 8. And that's just because whenever you've got a Jordan Binnington in net that's playing as hot as he is, it's such a dangerous team. So the rest of my roster, I had to bump Tampa Bay, and I kind of agree with you, Steve, that Tampa, Florida, if they end up meeting in the first round, that's similar to Colorado, Dallas. Really, flip a coin. Both are really good teams, and you could argue that is the Eastern Conference final, or with Dallas and Colorado, that's the Western Conference final.
Well, another difference to these lists, and Michael, you can get fired up about this one, is that Steve does not have Toronto on there. Steve, tell us why.
I think it's just a personal allergy coming from Ottawa and the Battle of Ontario and such. And I grew up in Ottawa. There's probably a little bit of bias that shouldn't be there as someone who professes to be in journalism. But no, I mean, part of it is just the sheer fact that this team has been so reliably poor in the playoffs. And that's part of it. I don't know. We talking contenders to get to the second round? Sure, I'll get Toronto in my top 8 there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but this is the big one.
Yeah, this is a really tough division that they've got to get themselves out of. And as I said in the last episode, if they get Ottawa in the first round, that's a team they've gone 0-3 against this year. And so I don't see them having any easy outs moving through the entire playoffs. So that's part of why they go into the mix. If you want to talk about regular season excellence, sure, you could talk me into them being in the top 8. But as far as a contender to win it all, not for me.
So not, top 8 teams to reach a game 7. I'll put Toronto at the top there.
Yeah, I love it.
All right, guys. Well, okay, let's talk maybe some advantages to, again, this is about contenders. So you've both talked a little bit about the path to get there. Is there a team that you have your eye on that maybe should be a contender but has such a difficult path that you're having a hard time picking them to go higher? Is there anyone that just sort of stands out?
For me, it's the Jets. And, I was just talking about how they might play the Blues.
Yeah.
A nice reward for arguably being the best team in the West is you get to play the hottest team in the West or in the NHL. So, even if they get past St. Louis, it looks like they're going to have to play either Colorado or Dallas in the second round. It just doesn't get easier. After that, then you're possibly playing a Vegas just to get to the Stanley Cup final, where you might face a Florida or a Tampa Bay. So, it'll be full marks to whatever team gets to the Stanley Cup final out of the West, because you're basically having to go through a gauntlet. And Ryan Kennedy kept mentioning that one of the reasons why he has Washington so high is he doesn't think that there's another team that has an easier path. And, for me, Winnipeg is the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, for me, it's I'm in the same mode. I mean, we picked the top 8 here, and that's, to me, that's a big, big achievement just to be in someone's top 8. That's a quarter of the NHL. You are the creme de la creme. And to me, that's all any GM is trying to do, is get in that top 8 and then let the chips fall where they may. I mean, I think, it's easier for me to indicate teams that might have a bit of an advantage in that they take on, maybe in the East, they get the Montreal Canadiens in the first round, or maybe in the West, they get Minnesota. Those would be two of the, I guess, and this is not a disrespect thing, it just be two of the softer opponents. After that, when you ask me who's going to have a hard time, I think everybody's going to have a hard time. Who has an easy path
No,
other than
exactly.
the teams that draw those 2 teams I mentioned?
The one team that I think actually has the easiest path will be one that's not even facing a wild card team, and that's Carolina. I'm really not sold on New Jersey, especially with the Devils missing Jack Hughes. And, when I look at their forward core, it's a very small group, not really built for playoff hockey.
Yeah.
That's the one matchup where I think that it's actually arguably better to be the second place team than the first place team in the Metro.
Well, one difference from your list, though, from last week to this week, Michael, is that because you moved in St. Louis, you bumped out Carolina. So even though you do feel good about their chances against New Jersey, are they just not a team that you have the faith in that can go the distance?
That's exactly it. I think they're going to be for sure in the second round.
Yeah.
Do I think that they're going to go further than that than they wanted to? No. I think the Rantanen trade really hurt them. Full marks to Logan Stankoven. I think he's going to be a terrific player, and I think maybe in a couple years he will be that guy that gets them to the promised land. But I'm not sold on their defense. And when you're just looking at who they're going to have to match up against beyond round 1, I don't have a lot of faith in the Hurricanes right now.
Goaltending is another area, again, where we've talked about that with Freddie Anderson being injury prone, Tkachuk, not sure exactly what that looks like. So again, it would be one of those teams where, right now too, they've been hot. They've been dominating a lot of games. We just saw that incredible matchup they had with the Washington Capitals. I'd love to see a series of that. But it does feel like maybe they just aren't quite ready to take that next step, although their window's been open for a while. So it certainly is interesting to see what will happen if they don't do that. All right. Let's move on to a little bit of discussion about what's going on around the league right now. And since we have our resident Sens expert here with us, we heard from Travis Green saying that Brady Tkachuk is out day to day with an upper body injury. Missed 2 games so far, I believe it is. So, Steve, what are you hearing about Tkachuk, and how concerned are fans in terms of what this injury is right now?
It's a bit of an unknown because this one happened on Sunday in Pittsburgh. He basically just wasn't looking where he was going in the neutral zone and slammed into Penguin defenseman Ryan Graves and suffered an upper body injury. So this is a new thing because we all saw at the Four Nations, he went down with an injury that it's kind of plagued him, and it's been a nagging thing. So it's kind of hard. It's kind of an unknown to know exactly what this new one means. But I mean, I really feel like this guy's such a warrior. that we would be having a different discussion if the Sens were 2 points out of a playoff spot and not 7 points a cushion there.
Right.
I think this part of this thing is being ultra conservative right now, and that victory over Tampa Bay last night allows them to keep doing that. So I think that there's a silver lining in it, in that you're mopping up that nagging injury and dealing with this one as well. And the longer the Sens continue to keep this cushion above the playoff cut line, then the longer you keep them out. I think you can be ultra conservative, and I'd even say the same with Nick Jensen. Keep those two guys on the sideline until things get dicey, if they get dicey.
I love how Brady Tkachuk, you said, got injured slamming into something. You could basically say that for the rest of his career. Brady Tkachuk was injured today because he slammed into a goalpost, a player, a car. But
Yeah,
you make a good point.
Behavior.
I really feel like the Sens don't have to worry about whether they're going to make the playoffs, whether they're going to, barely, are they going to be in? Are they going to be out? It seems like a foregone conclusion now that they're going to be in. So you do have that luxury where you can rest Brady for the playoffs, because he's going to be a guy that's, he's going to be slamming into a lot of things in the playoffs, Steve. That's his game. And, Ottawa is obviously a better team with him in the lineup, just because he drags so many other guys with him into the fight. Whatever we say about Matthew Tkachuk and how he changed the identity of the Florida Panthers. Well, the Ottawa Senators might as well have a Brady Tkachuk as their logo, because he really embodies the kind of style they want to play. And I mentioned it last time we talked, like, this is a team top 5 at body checks this year. And, I don't know how many Brady Tkachuk has, but you take him out of the lineup and I bet you that's a team that plays a lot smaller.
Yeah. Among the hit leaders, among the penalty minute leaders, and you need him there for game one. The closer he can be to 100%, the better off the Ottawa Senators are obviously going to be. That's the obvious take of the year. But that was a team that was 0-4 in the 4 games that Tkachuk had missed prior to these. And I think last night was the first game that they won. So this kind of shows you what he means to that group. And they won last night entirely because of Linus Ullmark, by the way.
Yeah, which is good to see, because he had been a little up and down, but certainly, again, concern in the sense that we know the style he plays and maybe there are some unknowns, but at the same time, like you mentioned, Michael and Steve, a luxury, because they aren't in this have to win every game as we approach the home stretch. Well, speaking of concerns, since joining Toronto after the trade deadline, Leafs forward Scott Laughton has had just 2 points. He's a -5 rating, which was the worst on the team in that span. He's got 13 games with the Leafs under his belt. So, I mean, at this point, he's played a decent amount. Like, he's had time to adjust. So, Michael, what have we seen from Laughton during this stretch? And are we starting to have concerns that maybe he isn't the right fit for the Leafs that they thought he could be?
It's a difficult one. I think they overpaid for Scott Laughton. They gave up a first rounder and one of their best prospects in Nikita Grabenkin, who, very much tries to model his game after, Matthew Tkachuk. So, that's a quality that they're going to be missing in a couple of years. You get Scott Laughton not for the playoffs, not for the regular season, Katie. They got him for the playoffs because they needed a guy, to, center their third line, which he's not doing right now. Like, Max Domi still has that spot, but B, to give him a little bit more jam in a third line role. And I think that's kind of a missing quality that the Leafs have had. Like, they've got skill up and down the lineup, but what they don't have is, when you're going up against an Ottawa or a Florida, do they have the guys that can match them their physicality? So I still think the jury's out. I don't want to say that the Scott Laughton trade acquisition has kind of blown up in Toronto's face. Let's see what he does in the playoffs, because, if he's the guy that, comes up big with a goal here or there, or plays a good checking line role, and the Leafs get further than they've got in the last decade, then you don't mind it. But right now it's, he looks like a guy that's still kind of looking for some comfort level and, trying to find his role in this team.
Yeah. What do you think, Steve?
I would be in the mode of, first of all, complete shock, because I completely forgot that the Leafs gave up a first rounder for Scott Laughton. But wow. But I would say that it's too small a sample size to freak out about offense, because he's never been an elite scorer.
It's more the rating that surprised me.
Yeah, and I mean, it's more a case of, I agree with Michael. I think this is an agitator. This is a guy that gets under a team's skin, and in the playoffs, when you're playing the same team every other game, you want a guy who's going to get under the skin, and if he stays with Max Domi, I mean, that would be, you'd want to punch a hole in their face in both cases if you're the opponent of that team. So
Yes.
I think that's part of why they did it, and he is capable of being a 30-point guy in this league. So too small a sample size for me just yet offensively. Plus minus, everybody's controversial about whether that's a valuable stat or not. I think that again, that first round is amazing to me that they gave up that much for him. But at the same time, I think in an every other night scenario against the same team, you'll notice Scott Laughton in the playoffs, I think, if you're a Leaf fan.
Yeah, so it's about the identity that he brings. It's about the role that he can play. It's about the postseason, which is the theme of basically every episode we talk about the Leafs. That's just the theme of it. It's like, why are we talking about them right now? It doesn't matter. We just need to see what they do in the playoffs. That is literally what this is all about. All right, well, how about on the other side of the coin? There are a handful of new additions that have been making a splash and doing really well with their new team. So which trade deadline acquisition and add has had the best impact with their new team that you've noticed, Steve?
I would say I would go to Mikko Rantanen. There's a guy that has added to an already super deep Dallas Stars team. He's a point-a-game guy there. I don't think it was ever a fit in Carolina for whatever reason. His stats were way off the normal stats, but he rolls into Dallas, and he's now got a point-a-game scenario, and he's heating up. Like, he's got 8 points in his last 5 games, and I think that's always a guy, as we saw in their Stanley Cup year in Colorado. That's a guy's game who also transfers nicely to the Stanley Cup playoffs. So I'll go Rantanen.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's a big-time gamer when it comes to the postseason. All right, Michael, who do you got?
I'm going to steer clear of the big-name acquisitions, and I'm going to go Yanni Gourde. Going to Tampa Bay. And at the time, it was a trade that people were saying, are you really giving up a first-rounder? Actually, 2 first-rounders when you consider that they also got Oliver Borkstam from Seattle and some prospects for these 2 guys who are going to be third-line guys. And Tampa Bay was like, yep, we know what we're getting. And boy, did they ever get it, because, Yanni Gourde has quietly put up 9 assists in 14 games. His line mate in Tampa now, Borkstrom's got 4 goals and 6 points in 14 games. And a guy that, let's see if I get the name right, Gage Gonzalez has got 3 of his 5 goals since Yanni Gourde and Borkstrom joined Tampa. So, whatever Laughton's not doing in Toronto, Gourde and Borkstrom are doing in Tampa, and they're providing exactly what John Cooper needs from a third line. And, maybe Steve's right. Maybe Florida doesn't have a chance against these Lightning team, because Kucherov is playing out of his mind. You've got now 3 great lines that can score. You've got Vasilevsky. You still got Hedman. Is there a weakness with this Lightning team? Because I don't really see any weaknesses right now.
Yeah, and you can look at the Olympian wise. I got the over under on about 7. Like there's a lot of guys on that team that are going to be at the Olympics.
How many Hall of Famers? Maybe 7 as well.
Yeah, maybe.
When Gourde was also, you got the familiarity too, right? It's not like he hasn't played for Cooper. He hasn't played in Tampa. I remember when I was with the Avalanche, we played Seattle in that series with Gourde there. Oh my goodness, what a pest, right? He actually is very difficult in the playoffs as well. So not just a player that's shown up and had an impact here in the regular season. We'll be very interested to see the impact he'll have in the playoffs, because he's just one of those guys. I mean, Tampa's a team that's just scary when they show up in the playoffs regardless. And that's why it doesn't matter whether they're a wild card team or they're in first. They're going to be ready to play in that first round, and they're always a threat. All right, well, this segment was called What's the Deal? So we need to talk about the new NHL Canadian TV deal. The NHL and Rogers Communications agreed to a 12-year deal worth $7.7 billion with a B. So start us off, Michael. What do we think about this deal?
Yeah, 7.7 billion. I'll get my Dr. Evil look out there. And, I think a lot of people are looking at Rogers Sportsnet with sort of evil moniker right now.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, as a hockey fan, I'm not entirely enthralled about this deal, because I really think that and it's been said by numerous people right now, that the Rogers product, it has been watered down for how much they actually invested in the rights. You look at their programming, it used to be, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but when Don Cherry was on in the first intermission, guys would be rushing from their press box seats right to the TV to hear what Grapes had to say. Does anyone do that now? It has the first intermission programming become must-watch programming? Not in the slightest. So I hope that with the investment, they're actually investing in talent, investing in the back end stuff, because if you got the rights, you got to do right by the people. And when I look at the US product with TNT, with Biz Nasty, with that whole panel, it is night and day, so much better than what the Canadians fans get to see.
Yeah, I'd argue that it goes in the opposite direction in all likelihood. You spend that kind of money, usually, and I spent a long time at both the big companies, Rogers and Bell Media, and usually when big investments happen like that, they try and find the money elsewhere, and it usually comes from manpower, unfortunately. So I would argue that it probably doesn't improve in that regard. I think it's shocking to me that they spend that kind of money when, from all reports, the former deal, the 12-year, I think it was $5 billion, they were struggling to recoup their expenditures on that. And now you're going to jack it up like this. I don't see them getting the money back in advertising. I think the only real path to making this work is to lean heavily on maybe subleasing out the rights to an Amazon Prime for a lot of this. That's the only way I can see this even beginning to make sense. And from an NHL standpoint, I don't quite understand it either, in that there was this exclusive negotiating window that existed between the NHL and with Sportsnet, the current rights holder. And the NHL decided, okay, this is a great deal, we're going to do this. But by doing that, by not, taking it outside, I think it was March, they extended it to the end of the month, but they got it done. Why not have an Amazon Prime and the golden goose that they are be part of that auction? I feel like while it's an amazing deal and a lot of money, you might have been able to bump it up a little more if you invited Amazon to the actual auction.
100%, or even just kind of parceled it off, like how the US has done. Why does it have to be one rights holder? Why can't you divvy it up?
And they may.
Fair. It's hard for me to say. Obviously, you guys are the experts because you're the ones that are getting to see the Canadian broadcasts every night. But I know for sure that when the deal changed over here, we have ESPN and TNT. It's starting to feel like there are times where you see kind of this bias towards TNT, having a little bit more commitment to the product. Again, ESPN maybe, they are spread too thin in some areas, but it does feel like, similar to what you're mentioning, there just isn't necessarily enough must-see programming, the way TNT really kind of creates a shock value. And it's the same thing that they do with their NBA coverage, right? They have these personalities that are the reasons that you're showing up, right? Obviously, people want to know what's going on in games, but it's the personalities and it's the talent and it's the segments that are driving the interest. And there's definitely a little bit of a disparity in between the ESPN and TNT versions of hockey coverage. All right.
Yeah,
Well,
if you're going to go after one person, if you're Rogers and Sportsnet, it's Paul Bissonnette. I think Paul Bissonnette is what creates that Don Cherry style effect. He is if you've ever read the book Purple Cow, he is the Purple Cow marketing wise. He's the guy that everybody's like, wow, he's different. And I think if I was going to invest in one person, it'd be that guy.
I just don't know how much time he has. I mean, between Spit and Chicklets, TNT, and all the other shenanigans that he's somehow always getting into, again, he's spread pretty thin, but certainly would definitely would up the quality there. It would be fun for everyone. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about some tension building. We mentioned this in our discussion about the top 8 contenders, but obviously we've got a situation now in the West where you've got number 1 Winnipeg, first in the Central, number 2 Vegas, first in the Pacific, and this wild card race that's shaping up to be very interesting, more for, I think, the teams at the top now than for whoever's getting in. So St. Louis has now passed Minnesota. So as it stands, it would be Vegas having to face off against St. Louis in that first wild card. So I guess, what is Vegas thinking right now? And do we kind of anticipate Minnesota staying in this wild card too, with the way that St. Louis is playing right now?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Minnesota, are they still missing Kaprizov right now? Because it seems like
he started skating, but yeah.
It's funny because I was looking at their record, I think, in the last 3 months, and it basically been a 500 team, like just treading water. And I
Yeah,
keep
it has.
wondering to myself, like, how are they still in this mix? But, maybe that's, more of a testament to, Calgary or Vancouver or Utah just not wanting to kind of seize the day and grab that spot. I don't see it happening. Like, there's just not enough runway for another team to kind of overtake Minnesota. That being
Yeah.
said, if I'm Winnipeg, 100%, I would rather play the Wild more than the Blues. Like, right, like I just mentioned it. Like, no one wants to play St. Louis. Maybe Vegas is the only team that just doesn't care because they feel like, it's a Stanley Cup winning team. They got Jack Eichel playing. He's the guy that should be in a Hart conversation that really no one's talking about being in the Hart conversation. So, that Blues team is ripe though for just one of those Cinderella runs, reminiscent of 2019.
Yeah.
I would tend to agree, Michael, but just to play devil's advocate, the Blues are playing out of their minds right now with 11 straight wins.
Yeah.
You have to wonder, okay, are you peaking too soon here?
Yeah.
This is an amazing run, but we all know that runs come to an end. I think 10 years ago here in Ottawa, we had the Hamburglar run, and Andrew Hammond couldn't lose. He had something like a 21-3 record down the stretch, but
Wow.
like in the final week, it was starting to leak oil, and then into the playoffs, the Hammond effect was over. The magic ended. So I don't think Jordan Binnington is Andrew Hammond. Don't get me wrong,
Right.
but we may not want to measure them through the lens of a team that's going to keep winning every single game. 11 straight wins is insane just to put them in this position. Now it's about continuing on. Can you continue this excellence, which is a lot easier said than done?
Hey, maybe Bennington is not Andrew Hammond, but is Jim Montgomery Craig Berube? Because Boston's probably kicking themselves for letting.
They are.
He's been, I know we talk about Holloway, Broberg, we talk about Kyrou and Shen and Robert Thomas, but how much of an impact has the coaching made in that team?
Well, and it feels like they've found their game too, where it's like I agree, like they're hot right now, and nobody expects them to win every game until they get to the first round of the playoffs. But they've learned something during this stretch. These 11 games have taught them something. They now have an identity. I think they figured out how to win in their way, and whether they keep winning every night, they certainly seem to maybe have an edge now in terms of just. I mean, I think that maybe is where the coaching comes into it.
I love Jim Montgomery. He's just
Everyone
Class A
does.
guy, and I just don't know what Boston was thinking. I think there was that has all the earmarks of just a moment of volatility as the Boston Bruins kind of accept what they are becoming at that stage of the game when he was fired back in the early winter. Like that was just a Class A mistake by the Boston Bruins to put it on Jim Montgomery when we know that it absolutely and now history has proven that it wasn't coaching. Sacco wasn't the answer. The change was not the answer, and now they've blown things up in Boston. So it was a dumb thing they did, and they're paying the price now.
Well, they got rid of Bruce Cassidy, and then he won a Stanley Cup. So, I mean, they're kind of striking out on all fronts with the whole blame the coach approach. Well, speaking of coaches, Patrick Waugh publicly ripped Anthony Duclair following the Isles' fourth straight loss. This was back on Tuesday night. So by Thursday, Duclair not at practice. And our own Stephen Rosen reported that Waugh had a media availability saying that Duclair is asked to take some time away to reflect following their conversation. So was Waugh out of line with these comments? And do we kind of feel like the Isles' struggles are more player-driven problems, or could they potentially be coaching problems? What do we see?
Well, I think it's I don't like it personally, but
Okay.
this is the NHL, and
Yep.
I listened to the comments, and they weren't. You always need to listen because sometimes they're articulated in a different way than when you read them. And when I
Sure.
read them initially, I was like, when he's saying god awful, I had this idea of him with a rolling pin and fire
Yeah.
and brimstone. It's like, I hate you, Anthony Duclair. And it wasn't like that. It was a couple of god awfuls in there that he referenced. And it reminded me a little bit of the Matt Duchene thing, yes. And we know that Patrick Roy, every once in a while, is going to call one of his guys out. So I didn't think it was to the degree where the player is going to need some time off, but it's one of those deals, what's happening behind closed doors. Like when you see stuff like that, guys, sometimes it's just the tip of the iceberg. If that's what you're saying publicly to the player, what are you saying, in the dressing room or in practice? So there may be more here than meets the eye, but Duclair was here in Ottawa for a while, and he wasn't bad, but he could sure be inconsistent and a bit of an enigma. And there's a reason he's played for 9 NHL teams already at 29.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's probably a little bit of blame to go on both sides.
It's a funny time for the NHL, though, Steve, because, Torts loses his job, very much a, lay down the hammer, coaches one way, rips his guys publicly, it seems like every other day. We saw Sheldon Keefe make news with his comments about Kovacevic. And now we're seeing Patrick Roy. And Patrick Roy very much seems like the old school approach. And I don't know if that flies anymore. I don't know if we're getting too soft or if it's just the players have so much power where, you're going to rip me publicly. I don't know what's going on, but Duclair can just say, okay, I'm not going to show up. I'm going to be here longer than you're going to be here. I'm going to be here in the NHL longer than you're going to be here. And when you're looking at the next kind of, wave of coaches coming up, like, we're talking about David Carl possibly being a guy that's going to get tapped for an NHL job. Like, he doesn't rip his players. Monty doesn't rip his players. There's so many coaches now that are, quote unquote, player friendly coaches. And I think that's becoming more the norm than the exception. And, the exceptions are like the Torts. And, I don't know if he gets another coaching job, at his age. But really, like, aside from Patrick Roy right now, how many coaches are like this? Like, we don't see too many Daryl Sutter coaches anymore.
Well, you also have to consider too, I don't think there's ever been more pressure on these coaches because they get fired. It feels like at the drop of the hat. So maybe they are on edge more. There's more pressure on them. So they are a little bit more likely to have moments like Wise. But I agree with you. It does feel like we're seeing a shift. Social media is probably a big part of that too, because the access and the complaints are easier to come by than ever. You just have to be so careful. But it'll be interesting to see whether Duclair or Roy end up with the Islanders longer. I tend to think it will be Duclair. All right, listen up, hockey players. You don't need to drop a fortune on sticks. You can snag a pro-level composite stick at stix.com, STIX.com. Head over and check it out. All right, let's get into some rapid fire. We've talked about a few of these teams, but we need you to pick one because it's looking like the Jets, the Golden Knights, the Stars, all going to have home ice advantage to kick off the playoffs. These are some pretty good teams. They all have excellent home records this season. So which building will be the toughest to win a playoff game in?
Well, I'll take the easy one in the Canadian market, and that the whiteout looks like a nightmare to have to play in. And I think it's a true hockey market. With all due respect to Dallas and Vegas, I think Winnipeg, hardcore hockey fans there, and they're so into it. So just from a building and atmosphere and noise perspective, I would choose Winnipeg out of those three. In terms of the hardest to win in, I think you always deflect to the best team, and I think that's Dallas out of those three. Okay. But in terms of just analyzing atmosphere and building, just building, definitely Winnipeg for me.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of broadcasting from there to start the whole playoffs last year with Avalanche and Winnipeg. Oh my goodness. I have never experienced anything like this. I had both earpieces in and holding my hands over my head. I couldn't hear a word that my producer said. I had no idea what was going on. That place there's never been a better use of the word electric. It genuinely felt like there was a pulse running through the entire arena. That whiteout was something to be seen. I was very impressed. Michael, what do you got?
Yeah. It's hard not to agree with Winnipeg, especially for a small barn that gets that loud. I'll say Vegas because it's Vegas. You got to remember when Washington beat Vegas in the Cup final, they had to stay inside and play Mario Kart because they were so afraid of being on the strip. That's how many distractions there are. The one team you didn't mention, Katie, I know they don't have a great home record because of that, but is there a team that wants to go play in Montreal and face that crowd, especially with the way it's going right now? Probably not. That's my favorite arena just in general. And then come playoff time, it just is so loud. So, I'm going to put Montreal there as well. That's just
Totally
home ice
fair.
advantage to a T.
I like it. All right. Well, we saw Jalen Chatfield pull a UFC move to throw Connor McMichael to the ice during a fight. Could have ended very badly. It was a scary move. So Chatfield received zero discipline from the NHL's Department of Player Safety. Not a fine, nothing. So do we agree or disagree with the decision by Player Safety to do nothing about this? What do we think of this move?
I think it should have been a suspendable offense. This is very dangerous.
Yeah.
All it takes is, a player falling on the back of his head on the ice. That spells disaster. And for me, what told me that it was extremely dirty was you had Jay Rosehill, who's a former enforcer, and John Scott, who's a former
Yes.
enforcer, both saying that it was dirty, both saying that they were outraged in this. So if John Scott, who is not the cleanest enforcer, also if he's saying it's dirty, then yeah, I tend to agree. Yeah, this should have been a suspendable offense.
I completely agree. I mean, it's if Chatfield is basically with his own arm strength, able to just throw him to the ground or the ice, then that's one thing. But what do we talk about all the time when it comes to slew foots? This wasn't a slew foot in the classic sense where a skate connects the back of another player's skate and it goes back on the back of their head. This was, though, basically using his whole leg and using the leverage from that to judo throw him over said leg. And so he goes back the same way you would on a slew foot, but maybe even worse.
Yeah.
So I agree with you, Michael. It could have been really, really damaging to McMichael, a really important player. And I'm just shocked that there wasn't some kind of discipline. I thought we'd be having an argument whether, it should have been 5 games, should have been 3 games. No games?
Know.
That's ridiculous.
And also, why are we seeing more MMA style moves in hockey fights? Like, it started with Bieksa and the Superman punch.
Yeah.
Now we're seeing, like you said, a judo throw. Like, what's next? A rear naked choke? Are we going to see guys just get choked out and you have to tap out in a hockey fight? Like, it's getting kind of unreal here.
Yeah,
Well,
there's one other angle that I'd throw into the mix as well when you bring that up is how often now you see. So you and me, Michael, we're opponents. We're into it, face washing, arm, punching away or whatever. And then for some reason, my teammate can come up behind you, mind you, reach around the front of you, face wash you, and then try to unscrew your head from its neck. Why does the NHL think that's cool?
Yeah, it's not.
No.
Yeah, I mean, but player safety has the onus to set the standard. And when they do things like this and they completely disregard what Chatfield did, or you're just making it seem like it's okay, and then it's going to get worse. They're just going to take it another step further, see what we can keep getting away with if they're not going to discipline us. So didn't like it. It'll be interesting to see if anything else develops, any more UFC moves make an appearance. All right, well, Cale Makar became the first D-man since Mike Green to score 30 goals. Pretty big deal for a defenseman. Who will be the next D-man to achieve this goal?
Maybe Landon DuPont, which will be 2028 or something, or by the time he gets in the NHL. If we're talking current NHLers, Jacob Chychrun might have the best chance, especially because of the team he's on. What he scored 20 goals this year as a defenseman, has got such a rocket of a shot. In all honesty, probably no one. This is a special kind of achievement, and full marks to Cale Makar. What is his back-to-back 90-point seasons as well for him? Just incredible.
Yeah. Standard Makar stuff.
Yeah, for sure. He's been phenomenal, and there's no one close to him. And there's only a couple of guys who have 20. You mentioned one of them in Chychrun. But I would probably go with, if I had to, and I'm skeptical, but Buffalo's Rasmus Dahlin. He's a guy that's, he's not even, I think he's maybe halfway to 30 right now. And I just feel like, because he had a 20-goal year last year, and that's a guy that surely one of these years the Sabres are going to figure things out. They have too much talent not to. And when they do, I feel like Dahlin will have a big offensive spike. So he's a guy that I really, really like the player. I like his edge. I like his skill. And I do think that he has that potential maybe to be a 30-goal scorer someday.
Hey, Katie, does Cale Makar get 30 if he's not on Colorado? Like, to Steve's point, if you put him in Buffalo, is he a 30-goal scorer? Or is it because, he's got Nathan McKinnon, who's basically attracts five defenders to him all the time?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's so much of your success as an individual, whether it's goaltending, whether it's a defenseman, the people around you, it's always been a team game and always will be. And a lot of your personal excellence, individual excellence, is set up by what's going on around you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that Cale Makar is generational and he is excellent. I don't know if he gets 30. I still think he's a game changer. I still think he wins a bunch of Norrises, but I mean, it's so hard to take anyone away from the idea of playing with McKinnon because two generational guys on the same team, I mean, what they're achieving separately, it's hard to say. We're just lucky we get to watch them together. I mean, unless you hate Colorado, but it's fun to watch. They put on a show. All right, last one. Speaking of generational, Ovi, 3 goals away from breaking Gretzky's all-time goals record. So Wayne hit 894 in 1,487 games. Ovi is at 892 in 1,485. I don't know if everyone realizes how close Ovi is to breaking this record in almost the same amount of games. So he has 2 games where he can break the record and could tie Gretzky in the number of games needed. Are we surprised to see that he's this close, and do we think he could do it in 2?
Well, I think absolutely he has a chance to do it for sure. That's part of why he's great. Ovechkin is been one of the special players in the NHL's history, but I really feel like that's asking a lot. Because right now you've got Wayne Gretzky and Gary Bettman. As of tonight, they're going to start touring around with him. And I think that maybe adds a little pressure. Ovechkin respects the hell out of Wayne Gretzky. And I think that's going to amp it up in terms of his want, in terms of his desire to get this thing. So I think he'll do it this season, but I don't think he'll do it in the next 2 games.
Okay.
I'm done betting against Alex Ovechkin, so I say he does it. I say he does it, basically in the next 2 games. The one thing I just keep going back to, we all thought this was going to be the record set in garbage time, basically, that Washington wasn't going to be a very good team and that they were just going to be feeding Ovi the puck just so he could get the record. I'm so happy that, it's happening with the Capitals team that is arguably the best team in hockey right now and a Stanley Cup contender in the truest sense. So, yeah, we're really witnessing history here. And it amazes me that he's still left open with these one-timers. Like how have defenders not learned, or maybe they have, and they can't stop him because he's that good. So what a tremendous honor this is.
Yeah, I mean, it really does feel like at this point, everyone knows where the office is. Everyone knows it's coming. It just doesn't matter. He is just that good and that capable of scoring. All right, guys, we went a little long, but that's okay. A lot of good stuff that we covered today. That does it for this episode of the Hockey News Big Show. Make sure to follow us on social media. See if Gretzky breaks that record before we even get our next show in. But for Michael Traikos and Steve Warne, I'm Katie Gaus. Thanks for watching, and we will see you all next time.